And a very good evening to everybody. This is Christopher Duigan on Saturday, the 21st of August. The next in our Music Revival online live stream series. This is our Saturday performance in concert. I have a very uplifting and I think very exciting, a very rich, a very positive program for you of music, and I hope that you can join us for the next hour in the selection of beautiful music and images. And today's been another beautiful August day. It's been warm. Yesterday was cold. Last night was very cold. But today's been a warm, sunny day once again. A little bit of cloud this afternoon. Apparently there's more cold weather, but August seems to be one of those times where it sort of vacillates between warm, cold, and anything in between. So I've had a bit of a tense day because, in fact, the internet, the fiber network in our region has been down the whole day. In fact, it only came back online, I think, at about 4 or 4:30 this afternoon, and it seems to be behaving. So we were worried. I was very worried that there was going to be no stream, no matter which connection. I had 2 connections, 3 connections I was trying, and nothing would work. Even the cell phone towers seemed to be down for some reason. And so I'm very pleased that we're running. And also this evening's positive music, it seems to be a very fitting celebration. This is the number 147 in our live streams, and I have to thank once again the KwaZulu-Natal Performing Arts Trust, who I found out yesterday are very generously supporting me once again this year. Last year I received a substantial amount from them in order to enable the streaming platform to be secured. It's quite a substantial annual fee that I pay to enable this to happen, and also to make sure that it is shared easily and reliably between the various platforms. And I found out yesterday that they have once again awarded me a substantial amount, which is going to enable this, and also, very interestingly and very enjoyably, very excitingly, is going to enable me to bring extra and additional musicians in. So thank you to the KZN Performing Arts Trust once again for their very generous support in making this possible and ensuring the continuity of this live stream program, which I know is viewed by many people in this part of the world, in KZN, but I also know in South Africa and in the rest of the world. So I'm sure we all thank them together for their support in making this possible and keeping this community-free project going. One of the things that I received in the feedback, just a little bit of the survey information, the number of people asked about guest artists, and I did have a few guest artists in the beginning of the year. I had intended to have more, but every time I had someone lined up, another of our COVID waves seemed to have come and running through, and I think I might have missed one potential artist by a few hours or days. It might seem, in fact, the very weekend that he was supposed to be performing here with us, he was ill. So that is going to be, it's on the cards, and again, thank you to the Trust for enabling us, because obviously these musicians do need to be paid, not only for the performance, but also for the rehearsal time and the traveling back and forth. So there are going to be a number of guest artists coming through the next couple of months, and I'm sure many of you will be very excited to hear that. So on to tonight's program. This is going to be a positive, I thought we needed an exciting, positive program in our concert classics selection, and I'm playing music for you this evening by Handel, the complete sonata opus 22 by Ludwig van Beethoven, music by Ravel Pavane for The Dead Princess, as well as 2 Chopin waltzes, brilliant waltzes, to end off this evening's selection. So I am going to start off with the Harmonious Blacksmith, the Variations by George Frederick Handel. Of course, as I always say, the story about Handel walking through London, being caught in an afternoon summer shower, and dived for cover down an alleyway to escape the rain, and found himself in a blacksmith's workshop where he watched the blacksmith working away merrily and also whistling this happy tune. And Handel was so taken by the tune and by the experience that he wrote the melody down and composed this set of variations around it. So it's an air and subsequent variations, an air being a song or air being a melody, like you have air on the G string. It's a vocal melody, a vocal line, a line that can be sung. And so this is a whistling tune that Handel was taken by, and he really writes a very a short group of ensuing kind of elaborations around this melody, but they also work up into a great sense of excitement, which I think conveys something of the joy and the thrill that he got out of this particular experience. That story, of course, is not true, but it's a nice one, and I like it, so we're going to keep it. So this is Handel's Harmonious Blacksmith, the air and variations from the Suite number 5 in E. The variations on the melody, the Harmonious Blacksmith, or the Harmonious Blacksmith Variations by George Frédéric Handel, as I said, not a true story, invented by a music publisher who published that in Victorian England, who decided that if he added that story to it, it would make a great idea and a great story, and it would sell more pieces of music, of course, which it did, because everything that has a great story is just that much more interesting and more memorable. But nevertheless, very exciting music. I think Handel was very inspired by that blacksmith and very inspired by the music, and it's just such a wonderfully exuberant and positive piece of music, like the Chopin of Handel, which I play quite regularly, that just starts the program off in a very nice and positive, settled way. So I'm going to move into the Sonata Opus 22 by Beethoven. This is going to be the major work on this program because I am playing all 4 movements. Beethoven writes this, he's probably in approximately almost 28 to 30 years old when he writes this music. He is establishing himself in Vienna as a brilliant young composer. He is established as a brilliant pianist, virtuoso pianist. He's really feeling very much on top of his game. Everything is peachy and everything is very positive, and he is a renowned, celebrated young man. And he writes in this piece of music a sonata which is so full of optimism and exuberance, and really exemplifies and brings together so much of the ideas of the day, of the positivity, the looking forward in a very assured manner. The music is very confident, and it gives us a great sense of security because it fits by all the textbook structures, it fits by all the usual expectations of what a grand sonata in 4 movements is supposed to be but like. And as I'm playing the whole sonata, I'm going to give you some ideas just to listen to in each movement. I'm going to give them to you now so that you know exactly what you're hearing. In the first movement, it's very bristling, it's bustling, it's full of energy. There's a great sense of optimism. The second theme, almost like everyone's sitting around the table enjoying some good beers together. A great sense of singing, almost like a hymn, like an anthem where many people are joined in together. And the last idea which you need to listen for, that's the theme, the melody that ends off the first section, what we might call the exposition or the exposing of the musical ideas. Now if you look at all 3 of those ideas, see there's a very pronounced situation where everything is rising upwards. Everything moves up. Starts in the lower part of the keyboard and moves upward. And this is not by accident, because when Beethoven does this, it gives us a sense of upliftment, it gives a sense of excitement, that the energy is rising, that things are bubbling up into the horizons, you might say. And this really gives us a great sense of optimism, brilliance, and a great sense of profound, secure feelings in the future, you might say. Now, that last melody, which I said you should listen out for, becomes very important in the middle section of this first movement, what we might call the development, technical terms, but the middle section where he uses that, and again, and he repeats that idea again and again and again in many different forms until eventually it becomes very quiet, and the bass. So all the energy which he had in it, he sort of gradually pulls the energy out, explores it, sucks the energy out or burns the energy out of that particular musical idea before the opening of the first idea returns. And we hear the whole opening exposition idea now repeated, what we call a recapitulation. So exposing the ideas, turning them around, going through a bit of turbulence and discussion, and then recapping the ideas. That's what the first movement sounds like. The second movement, a beautiful melody, what one might call a kind of inspiration of the Italian singing style. You might say this is an orchestra in your left hand. beautiful melody, a beautiful singing line in the right hand. And throughout this piece, Beethoven very cleverly, the second movement at least, Beethoven very interestingly, cleverly exploits this idea of notes which don't belong together, what we call dissonance. So it's a very unpleasant chord, but it needs to resolve. And there's the resolution. And the next one. So throughout that movement, there's all this sense of sighing, the sense of these difficult notes which come together, which are resolved, a sense of anguish that he creates and then resolves them. The third movement, a minuet, very stately dance again, but very elegant, Beethoven. It's very charming, but of course Beethoven puts a stamp on it. His Beethoven thumbprint is rather strong hand, you might say, or a very big booted foot puts his way into the minuet before it returns to its original idea. And the last of the four movements, a rondo, very charming melody which you'll hear at the beginning, which comes back again and again and again. So all four of these movements are very sunny. There's a great sense of predictability. It's not challenging. It's not overly exerting. It's not stretching the piano. It's just very content and very happily within its place. Beethoven thought to himself, said in fact that up to this point he thought that this was his best and most perfect composition. Now I've played the first movement for you several times, the first movement of the Sonata Opus 22, but now I'm going to play all four movements, the four-movement work by Ludwig van Beethoven, the Sonata in B-flat major, Opus 22. Well, that was the Sonata Opus 22 by Ludwig van Beethoven, a young Beethoven, almost 30 years old, full of optimism, confidence, belief in the world, belief in the future. I think he had very little sign of his encroaching deafness by this point, and what he thought to be his best composition by so far. So in that movement in particular, you can't help, I can't help just being amused and kind of a smile on one's face by the detail that he brings, this beautiful thing, and how it appears so unexpectedly. Just when you least expect it, and then with all this beautiful ornamentation. Broken chords there, and the ornamentation over here. Beethoven really having a great sense of fun, a great sense of enthusiasm. And I think just coming back to this idea of why Beethoven is so important is that in that piece of music you experience so many emotions, so many ideas, apart from the intellectual grappling of the first movement, the beauty and the plaintive nature of the second movement, but the humor and the generosity and the fun that he has in the last movement. And of course, I had to smile at one point because I get mixed up between playing on a sheet music and an iPad. I don't know anyone noticed. I came to the end of the page and I went to tap the music like an iPad to turn over. Why didn't the page turn? Of course, this is a proper physical piece of sheet music. I've got to turn the page myself, not just tapping like an iPad. So it's a really great piece of music, and I haven't played that piece for about 30 years. I studied this when I was an undergrad student with the pianist Isabella Stengel, who I've been thinking a great deal of the last, I always think of her, but certainly in the last few weeks. And it's a piece that I just haven't played for many, many, many years, and what a joy it is, what a joy it was to study this music with her. And that's Beethoven Opus 22. What a great sonata. So I'm going to move on to three pieces of music to end this evening's program. I'm going to start off with a little palate cleanser, you might say, the Ravel's Pavane for the Dead Princess. So Pavane always got this bit muddled up with the title. It wasn't a dead infant, but a dead princess, the infante being reference to the young girl princess as a term used in Spain or Portugal generally. And Ravel was rather amusingly in his anecdotes. He always had so many amusing things to say to people who he engaged with or corresponded to, and apparently he was once teaching this to a student who was playing it with great laborious pain and at a very, very slow speed, and he turned to her quietly and tapped her on the shoulder. He said, "It's the princess that died, not the Pavane." You need to play it up, play it a little bit faster, with a little bit more life, please. And after that, to end this program tonight, I'm going to play two Chopin waltzes. I haven't played these pieces for some time, but they're such brilliant pieces. Grande, Valse Brillante, the Chopin gives it the brilliant title. They're full of energy, full of exuberance and excitement and brilliance. Very charming, very beautiful music, such rewarding music to play. I'm going to start off with the waltz in A flat, opus 34, and then the very famous waltz in E flat, opus 18. I'm having an iPad moment again. was the Grande Valse Brillante Opus 18 by Frédéric Chopin, and before that the Valse Brillante Opus 34, number 1, also by Frédéric Chopin. That does bring a close to this evening's program. I hope you've enjoyed the selection of music. I've tried to focus on beautiful, uplifting, positive, energetic, and just confident, forward-looking music. Believing in everything, the future that it holds, music itself is going to be absolutely perfect. It's always going to be the same. It's not going to go away, and that's a comforting thought. If you are able to support us, please do visit our website. We're very grateful. I'm very grateful for every contribution that comes through, that keeps these streams going, and that also keeps me busy. Thank you again to the KZN Performing Arts Trust for their support, which has come through for the second time last year and again now this year, which I'm very, very thrilled about. Very grateful. I'm sure we're all very grateful for that, and that it does mean that a part of our substantial part of our operating costs, internet costs, is at least covered. And thank you, Barry, once again for the technical support this evening. There have been no dogs whatsoever. Gosh, I have fed them. I know last week there was a consternation in that they hadn't been fed and they were sulking, but they have been fed. I think Lucy appeared at some point but has disappeared. No dogs this evening. Sorry, everyone. Thank you for everyone who's contributed to the survey. We'll be publishing results on my website this week, just for those of you interested, as well as some more details. I've had many questions about what exactly is that orchid and what is that reflection that we see in the piano? Where did that mirror come from? We've been looking at it for a year and a half and would like to know more. I'm going to be adding a section to my website that's going to give you some of that detail this week. So thank you for joining us tonight. Hope you've enjoyed the selection of music. Look forward to seeing you on Wednesday for another exciting program in our piano hour, this of Play Piano Play selection, I think it will be. And I have a few ideas. Oh, I have some pitter-patter of feet. A little foot. Tell her, Luce, are you coming to say hello? Yes, you are coming. Here's little Lucy. Yes, little Lucy. Yes, everyone wants to see. Everyone's complaining. Everyone's saying, but the show's not the same. We haven't seen Lucy. Where is little Lucy? Let's turn little Lucy that way. Hello, Luce. How are you doing today? Yes, you're fine. And you're all fluffy and clean. You absolutely, yes, you've been well fed and well slept. And what did you do? Yeah, I know you did nothing. We all know you did nothing. And you've got a little fluffy paw. Say hello to everybody. And Luce, yes, you also liked the music. It was just a little bit of a loud bit in the Beethoven. In the beginning, you found a bit difficult. But actually, the music was very enjoyable, wasn't it? Yeah. Absolutely. Little Lucy, the long-haired Dachshund. There we go. Now everyone's going to be happy because you've been on the show. And everyone has seen you. Thanks, Luce. I have some treats for you now. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Going to play out with a little improvisation. Look after yourselves. Keep well, stay well, and see you on Wednesday.